Speak to this because we've been talking about Ukraine all morning, and you've been very involved in that battle. I want to show you this real quick, if I could. I don't know if we even have time. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was just speaking literally moments ago, and after a 4.5-hour meeting with Russian officials in Saudi Arabia to reset relations with Moscow, and I would get to your thoughts on it if we could.
Trump's strategy on Ukraine just flipped the script. Check this out.
The goal of today's meeting was to follow up on the phone call the president had a week ago and begin to establish those lines of communication. The work remains. Today is the first step of a long and difficult journey, but an important one. And President Trump is committed to bringing an end to this conflict.
We are trying to bring an end to the conflict. Apparently, we're also asking for something on the order of $500 billion in terms of access to minerals and other things for Ukraine. Is that a fair deal?
Okay, look, I don't know anything about the deal and the intricacies of it. What I would say is, first of all, you put up people on the screen who are very talented. So if I look at this from an entrepreneurial perspective, the first thing I'm looking at is, okay, those three people are very talented. The second thing, I'll tell you something I think Trump does very, very well. He says, I'm not going to accept a paradigm that essentially leads to a stupid conclusion. And he's like, okay, great. I'm going to give you a new paradigm. You don't like that, my paradigm? Give me another one. And I think I think he's quite brilliant at this. So what I see is he's like, I'm not accepting a paradigm where America just keeps financing things. There's no real discussion. I'm sending three of the most talented people there. Let's figure it out. And again, what I would say to people who are trying to figure out how to make themselves, how to be builders is, do not accept a paradigm that is stupid, no matter who tells you that you should have it.
Why should America continue writing blank checks without getting anything in return? This marks a fundamental shift in how global conflicts are handled. Instead of just throwing money at the problem, there's a clear expectation of strategic benefit, whether that's economic access, political leverage, or long-term stability. Sending top-tier negotiators signals that this isn't just about diplomacy. It's about securing tangible outcomes. Isn't that exactly the kind of leadership we need? Results over rhetoric?
Okay, let me ask you a different question about paradigm shifting. So one of the things that's going on right now, Elon Musk working with the Doge team in Washington to try to get at some of the misspending that's been going on over the years.
Fraud, waste, and abuse.
And I think there's a lot of people who are super supportive of that. At the same time, you're hearing about resignations and all sorts of other things of folks who are questioning the access that they're getting to data. You are somebody who lives within data. You care about safety and security of data. Do you think we should have those concerns? And is there a way to do whatever's being done right now so that you can take the country and those who are questioning all of this with you, if you will?
What I don't like about what's going on is I just view this as, well, let's watch the Democratic Party commit suicide. And like, I've been a Democrat most of my life. I kind of view myself as outside it, but I don't like watching the Democrats just commit suicide. And what I see is most of the country doesn't really, at this point, given the fraud, waste, and abuse we know is there, 90% of the country is like, get rid of that fraud, waste, and abuse. And I just view this as yet another example of the progressive left boxing themselves into a suicide dance. Now, what the progressive left should be doing is saying, okay, Elon, you're clearly the most qualified person in the world to do something like this. We want to dialogue with you about how you're doing and what are you doing. I don't believe that's actually what happened. And again, I like Elon. I know I think he's obviously the most important builder in the world. And I just think, if you want to say my former side, I don't believe that they're actually engaging. I think it's like another dance where I'm supposed to say, of course, like whatever. It's like there's this one issue where I might, and then you get boxed into you cannot solve the problem. And then I would say, what is the biggest problem in this society? Biggest problem in this society from my perspective is legitimacy of our institutions. Why aren't they legitimate? They're not legitimate because, okay, do any of you really believe that 99% of your taxpayer dollars are being spent? But last and not least, and probably arguably most importantly, there's two revolutions happening. One is transparency and one is AI. Okay, so why is it that we do not know where every penny of our money goes? Like, how do you explain that to people? And by the way, slightly more technically, what large language models do is they mean you can go into the contracts and see exactly what happened. So in the past, we couldn't do this. Now we can. The right response is we want this to happen, we want to happen, we want to be involved in the dialogue. The real response is, it feels like the people criticizing Elon don't want it to happen. And this is going to destroy those people.
The battle for transparency, AI versus institutional control. Why should any taxpayer accept that billions of dollars disappear without traceability? For decades, we've been told that government spending is just too complex to track, that it's impossible to ensure every dollar is used efficiently. But here's the truth. That was never about complexity. It was about control. The real question isn't if we can trace where taxpayer money is going. It's why those in power are so desperate to stop it. AI and large language models have changed the game. We now have the ability to sift through thousands of contracts in seconds, analyze patterns, and expose inefficiencies that were once buried in bureaucratic red tape. The reality is, this technology is a direct threat to the old system, which relied on opacity to maintain power. So let's be honest. This pushback isn't about privacy, governance, or ethics. It's about stopping people from seeing what's really happening behind closed doors. The legitimacy crisis, why institutions are losing public trust. There's a reason faith in institutions is at an all-time low. The average person doesn't believe their tax dollars are being spent wisely, and why would they? We've seen waste, fraud, and inefficiency time and time again, yet we're told to trust the same broken systems. When you introduce AI-driven transparency, you force a new paradigm, accountability in real time. But here's the issue. Those who benefited from the old way of doing things will fight this shift at every turn. They're not interested in transparency. They're interested in control. The fact that some politicians and bureaucrats are actively resisting efforts to track spending should tell you everything you need to know. The role of Elon Musk disrupting the old guard. This is where Musk's involvement makes things interesting. He isn't just proposing reform, he's completely dismantling the old structure of governance and financial oversight. And that terrifies people who have built their careers on a system that thrives in the shadows. Think about it. Why is there such a massive backlash to simply auditing government spending? The only logical explanation is that people don't want to know the truth. And if transparency itself is controversial, doesn't that say more about the people in charge than it does about the technology being used? Two revolutions, AI and decentralized information. What's happening here is bigger than just government contracts. We are witnessing two revolutions at once. Number one, AI revolution. The ability to process massive amounts of data means we can now track inefficiencies and corruption with unprecedented speed. What used to take years of investigative work can now be done in minutes. That's not just reform, that's a fundamental shift in power. Number two, transparency revolution. The traditional gatekeepers of information, mainstream media, bureaucratic agencies, political institutions, are no longer the sole arbiters of truth. Decentralized data access means ordinary people can now scrutinize government spending and decision-making in ways that were once unthinkable. When these two forces combine, they completely upend the way institutions operate. This isn't just about policy, it's about survival for those who benefited from the old system. The resistance to change, who's really afraid of accountability? We should be asking, who benefits from stopping AI-driven transparency? The only people who should fear an audit are those with something to hide. Yet, instead of embracing these tools, we see massive resistance, resignations, and fear-mongering about data security. Let's be real. This isn't about data security. This is about preserving the status quo. The reality is, large language models and AI-driven analysis could make government spending more efficient than ever before. But the people attacking these efforts aren't worried about efficiency. They're worried about exposure. The future, a choice between transparency and corruption. At the end of the day, this comes down to a simple choice. Do we embrace a future where AI exposes waste and inefficiency, making governments more accountable? Or do we cling to a system where secrecy and complexity allow corruption to thrive? The people resisting transparency today will not be remembered as protectors of democracy. They will be remembered as the last defenders of an obsolete system. AI is here. Decentralized information is here. The only question is whether we will use these tools to create a more accountable future or whether we allow the same forces that failed us to dictate the rules of the game. But one thing is clear. Those fighting against transparency are revealing more about themselves than they ever intended to.